Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for attending. Please, commissioners, please, and staff, please make sure that you sign in at the sign-in sheet in the front lobby. So this is the special meeting of Thursday, March 30th of all city commissions. It's 6 p.m. The commissions present will be the Audit Committee, Bicycle Pedestrian, Arts and Culture, Housing, Library, Parks and Recreation, Planning, Public Safety, Sustainability, and Technology, Information and Communications Commission. We have one item of business, new business. It is commissioner training on city policies and procedures, Brown Act, and conflicts of interest. I'll open it now for any members of the public that wish to provide public comment. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public comment period. We'll go ahead and I have my portion. I'll go through my portion and then we can have questions at the end of my portion, and then our city attorney, Chris Jensen, will also speak, and then we can ask, we'll have another Q&A session at the end of that. So first I want to welcome our new appointments. Congratulations to you, and thank you to everyone for volunteering to serve on a commission. We realize that it is a significant time commitment. Your contribution as a commission member is greatly appreciated. Your work informs the city council and assists them in making better decisions for the community. So the clerk's office will organize this training annually. Completion of this training is required for all commission members as well as the staff liaisons and the commission administrators. The purpose of the training is to review roles and responsibilities and to provide an update on any changes in laws or policies that may be relevant to conducting the work of the commissions. We're also joined today by our city attorney, Chris Jensen, who will review the Brown Act for public meetings and conflict of interest related to the Political Reform Act. You can read more on the topics of today's discussion in the Commissioner Handbook. It is linked in the agenda, as well as it has been provided to you with your oath and orientation materials, but the clerk's office is happy to email that to you if you'd like to just send us an email. You'll mainly be working with your commission liaisons. However, you will hear from the clerk's office from time to time. We met everyone when we conducted your oath of office and provided you with your orientation. We'll also notify you of any required compliance for filings, and we will also coordinate trainings. You'll always receive a notification for us and instruction on how to complete these filings and trainings. You'll also hear from us during the annual recruitment process of all commissions. And you will possibly hear from us with regard to monitoring and reporting your attendance and your eligibility. The clerk's office also works with the commission admins to ensure compliance of all published meeting agendas. So we review every single notice that is published. So first I want to introduce you to the city's reporting structure. The city of Cupertino operates as what is known as a city council, city manager form of government. The council is comprised of 5 elected members, and they are elected by the citizens of Cupertino to overlapping 4-year terms. They appoint membership to the city commissions and committees, and the commissioners report directly to the city council. The council also appoints 2 individuals, the city attorney and the city manager. The city manager is Pamela Wu, and you know City Attorney Chris Jensen. The city manager is responsible for hiring, terminating, and supervising all city staff. The role of the council is as policy officials. They set policy and pass laws and regulations, and they also approve a budget each year. The city manager implements the laws that the city council adopts, oversees all city personnel and the day-to-day operations. The city manager also proposes an annual budget for council consideration. The city manager also makes recommendations on all matters that come before the city council. City staff's role is to provide expert and neutral advice to the council and assist the city manager in implementing council direction. And this is all while still reporting to and following what is delegated by the city manager. Each commission is assigned a liaison and an administrator to support the commission. They're all listed here. I won't go through each one of them, but it is listed here for you to review. The liaison is assigned based on their knowledge and expertise related to the work of each commission. Staff liaison's role is to guide the commission's work and offer technical expertise on the issues. They must remain politically neutral, so please do not ask opinions about city council candidates or ballot measures, since they will not be able to respond. The liaison attends all meetings, works with the commission chair to coordinate the meeting agendas, including ensuring appropriate business is being covered and the necessary discussion items are listed on the agendas. They communicate commission recommendations and goals to council, and the commission admins prepare the minutes and ensure the proper noticing and publication of the agendas. So liaisons will be providing assistance and advice as much as they can, but while following city manager directives. The role of the commissions as a whole is to provide recommendations in their advisory capacity to the city council. This includes representing the community and weighing public input on issues and rendering recommendations to the city council. The commission acts as a body. A majority vote is required on all matters. Individual commission member statements or comments are not considered action or direction. The scope of work, purpose, and other primary functions for each commission can be found in the city's municipal code, chapter 2. So I have provided summaries of each, but I won't go through them. They're listed here for you. So the complete responsibilities for each commission is included in the municipal code, and so I encourage you to review those if you haven't already done so. The commission's work on goals and as prioritized in the city council work program. So it's the commission's work on the goals that are prioritized by the city council annually, but they also will work on their own ongoing projects that align with council goals. The fiscal year 2023-2025 city work program will be considered this next Tuesday, April 4th. So your commission liaison can provide you with any directive updates after adoption. Commissioner responsibilities. So you're responsible to read the commissioner's handbook, to prepare for and participate in commission meetings. Please read the materials and send clarifying questions to staff in advance. You'll want to make sure that you understand what is being presented for you to discuss and to vote on in advance. You'll also need to attend 75% of the regular meetings annually, and that is based on the city's attendance policy for commissioners. And remember that you represent the community as a whole. You'll also file a Form 700 Statement of Economic Interests annually. You'll complete ethics training every 2 years, and you'll attend the annual commission training. So commissions follow the Rosenberg's rules of parliamentary procedure during meetings. These are in place to run efficient meetings and to accomplish city business. It allows for orderly deliberation of items, and the commission should arrive at a majority decision. The meetings are run by the chair, and just a reminder to be respectful for sometimes differing opinions. The City of Cupertino ethics training program includes a required 2-hour training for public officials and city staff per state law. It educates officials on ethical standards, and it assists with applying moral principles and values in your decision making. It also reduces the likelihood of missteps. So again, you'll receive notification from the clerk's office, but you need to complete at least a minimum of 2 hours of training. The Cupertino City Council also adopted an ethics policy in January of 2020. It sets the conduct of members, it supports fair decision-making, and it encourages preserving an atmosphere of respect and civility. It provides direction on compliance with the law, and it also discusses conflict of interest, which City Attorney Jensen will discuss a little bit later. So just a couple of reminders for you. I mentioned the attendance policy earlier, but I want to emphasize that you cannot miss more than 25% of your regularly scheduled meetings in a calendar year, or 3 consecutive meetings, whichever occurs first. So this rule is dependent on the frequency of your commission. If you only meet once a quarter, then you can only miss 1 meeting. So the clerk's office will always send you a warning notice so that you can make adjustments for the next meeting. And then this resets annually. And one final reminder, your Form 700s are due on Monday, April 3rd. Lauren, our Deputy City Clerk, has sent instructions on how to file electronically, but if you have any questions, feel free to email the clerk's office. And now we have a moment for questions. If you have any questions, please come to the microphone in front, or if not, we will take a 2-minute break for us to make our switch to Chris's presentation. Okay, Chris, that is your cue.
Thanks. Close all this. That's not what I want. Just give me a second, I'll find the right presentation here, then we can get started. Oh, thanks. Okay, there we go. All right. Thank you, everyone. So for those of you who have not met me, I'm Chris Jensen. I'm the city attorney. I give legal advice to the city council, city departments, as well as boards and commissions. And so, I'll be interacting with many of you in that role. Some of you will also be interacting with Michael Wu, who is a senior assistant city attorney, especially those of you who are on the planning commission. Where he actually staffs those meetings, and so especially for those of you who here who are new, welcome. I look forward to working with you. It's going to be interesting, and there's a lot to familiarize yourself with if you have not been involved in a government agency before. So tonight we're going to talk about the Brown Act, which are the general rules governing public meetings in California. And then we're going to talk about conflict of interest rules that will be applied to all of you in your role as officials of the city of Cupertino. So with that, I'll jump into the first part, which is the Brown Act presentation. The Brown Act is a state law that dates from the 1950s, and it's intended to ensure transparency in public meetings and ensure that decisions are not made behind closed doors. So, the basic requirement is all meetings of legislative bodies are open in public. And because each of our commissions is appointed by the City Council, it's a legislative body under the Brown Act, for the most part, advisory to council. The basic requirements are that the legislative bodies must conduct business and make decisions in public meetings. The agendas must be published, available to the public, and the discussion must be limited to items that are on the agenda. And there must be an opportunity provided for public comment before the body makes a decision. So, a meeting is both what is obviously a meeting and some things that aren't obviously a meeting. It's any time that a majority of the legislative body gathers to hear, discuss, or deliberate a matter that's within its subject matter jurisdiction. There are regular meetings, which are regularly scheduled. The chair or a majority of a commission can call a special meeting, and there are also emergency and adjourned meetings, which you're probably less likely to encounter as commissioners. The meetings encompass both deliberation, discussion, voting, but also the collective acquisition or exchange of facts. So it's defined broadly. It's intended to promote open and public discussion. So there are exceptions. So what's not a meeting under the Brown Act? So individual contacts with other commissioners, as long as a quorum is not present, are not a meeting in and of themselves. Staff briefings with less than a quorum that are present are not a meeting, so you can certainly meet with staff to gather information about items that come before you. And then there's exceptions for social and ceremonial gatherings, conferences and seminars that you may have the opportunity to attend, opened and publicized community meetings by other agencies or private organizations, and meetings of other legislative bodies. For example, if you were to attend a city council meeting. So the rule that individual contacts with other commissioners is generally allowed is tempered by the fact that there is the concept of serial meetings under the Brown Act. And a serial meeting can occur through a series of communications where a quorum of the legislative body of the commission collectively discusses, deliberates, or makes a decision on an item. So, and that can occur really one of two ways: through the wagon wheel, where there's one member who has communications with multiple other members, and collectively more than a quorum participates in that decision, or was the daisy chain where member A talks to member B, who talks to member C. And 3 of the 5 members on the commission have had a discussion outside of a notice meeting, and there's potentially a violation of the Brown Act there. So just one way, just to touch on serial meetings, one thing that comes up a lot is, of course, we all use email a lot for our communication, and communicating with other commissioners via email does create a risk of a serial communication. So one thing that you'll see staff do, and it encourage you to pay attention to it, is we'll usually blind copy commissioners when we're sending out communications to the entire commission. And that's to avoid people replying all and then potentially creating a serial communication. So we use that hygiene internally as staff to try to avoid issues, and just encourage you to pay attention to who's on an email before you respond, because it's just a really easy way to run into this issue. The Brown Act also has relatively new rules surrounding social media, and it doesn't prohibit the use of social media to discuss city business. You could use social media to answer questions, to communicate with public, including where you're allowed to express positions on issues. But it does strictly limit what members can use social media to discuss with other members of the commission. And these rules are even stricter than sort of the general rules, because they apply even when a quorum is not involved. So You can't respond to other, I should say commissioners, I apologize, I didn't update that slide. You should not respond to other commissioners on social media. You shouldn't like their posts, not even emojis. So it's just so generally, don't talk about city business with other commissioners on your commission on social media platforms you use, and you should be fine. I mentioned earlier that the Brown Act requires everything that the commission discusses to be agendized. And anything that's not on the agenda can't be discussed by a majority of the commission present. The agenda is just limited to a brief general description of what should be discussed. And for regular meetings, it needs to be posted 72 hours in advance, 24 hours in advance before the special meeting, and your staff liaisons will, of course, handle that process. There is exceptions that allow limited discussion of non-agendized matters, but this really is strictly limited. So you can make brief reports of announcements of activities. It's fine to ask a question, for example, if something is raised during oral communications, asking a question for clarification, or referring an item to staff for follow-up, or to briefly respond to public comments. But the emphasis is really brief. There should not be any extended dialogue about anything that's not on the agenda. Mentioned earlier that the Brown Act also requires public participation at every meeting of a legislative body. So that includes, for regular meetings, there's an opportunity to comment on any item that's within the subject matter of the jurisdiction of the legislative body. And at any meeting, there must be some opportunity to comment on the specific items of business before or during the council's the commissioner's consideration of the item. And then information that's provided to the commission in connection with the decision, unless it's privileged, must be distributed to the public at the same time that it's provided. And then I also note that there's no requirement that people participating in person or online need to give or show their name. They have the right to participate in the meeting anonymously. There is the potential for enforcement under the Brown Act. The most common method of enforcement is, if there's an action that's taken that's alleged to be in violation of the law, somebody who's contesting it can make a demand for a cure and correction of the violation. And the possible consequences of that are to void the action of the legislative body. There could be an injunction, a court-ordered injunction against future violations and attorney's fees award against the city. Criminal prosecutions are provided under the statute where the violation is intentional, but their prosecutions, I don't believe there's ever been a successful criminal prosecution under the Brown Act, in part because the intent requirement is hard to meet, but it is on the books. I did want to finish up this section by I know there have been a number of questions on where we are with remote participation in commission meetings. So it's been communicated to all of you that the emergency authorization for fully remote meetings that we've been operating under since March 2020 ended on February 28th. So now the quorum must be present in person for all meetings of the commissions. There are limited options for individual commissioners to participate remotely. There's what sometimes referred to as the classic Brown Act teleconferencing exception that predated the pandemic, and that allows commissioners to participate remotely if the location where they participate from is open to the public and posted on the agenda. So, if you were participating from home, you would have to have people come into your living room or office or wherever you were, or at least allow people to come into your living room or office wherever you take the meeting. So it's not particularly user-friendly. There was legislation that just took effect January 1st that allows remote participation without those requirements in limited cases, but there has to be just cause or an emergency. So it can be something like a contagious illness that you don't want to expose other people is one example. If there's a need to take advantage of those exceptions, I'd encourage you to reach out to your staff liaison, and they'll work with the city attorney's office to figure out what to do. As I told here, just the rules are complicated, and so we can try to help you sort through them if those issues come up. But the default is going to be that people are participating in person. So just to conclude, a great resource for anybody that wants more information is the Open and Public Guide published by California League of Cities. It's written in relatively non-legalese language. There's a link here. We can make these slides available for the link. And then, of course, the city attorney's office is available to answer legal questions of any kind, including Brown Act questions. And so that's my contact information, but you should feel free to reach out to anybody in our office. So with that, I can take questions now, or I can take questions now. I think we're doing well on time. So, yes. I'm sorry. I have to remind you to come up to the mic so our video team can capture it.
Hello everybody, my name is Archana, I'm a library commissioner. My question is about the email sending. Suppose we are discussing about some plan or some event or something. So is it wrong, like by Brown Act, to email together to 3 or more commissioners?
Yes.
Okay, then what is the best way? Is it always I write to the city person and she will send to everybody?
Yeah, so if you have questions or comments, those should be routed to the staff liaison, and the staff liaison can make a decision about whether those are appropriate to send on to the other commissioners. If it's factual information that's relevant, we might be able to share that in advance of the meeting. If it's your opinion on something that's before the commission, then that can't be shared outside of the meeting with the majority of the commissioners. And so that's something that you're free to communicate with the staff liaison, but if you want, you should have that discussion with the commission in a public meeting with the other commissioners.
No, my concern is about an event. Suppose we are planning a poetry event for the whole city from Poet Laureate program or something that is community-based, that is cumulative. So it needs to be sent to everybody, but we cannot send to the group. So it has to come to the city management and then they will relay to everybody. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, I would, for that kind of coordination, I would encourage you to go through the liaison for the commission.
Okay, second question is, what's a quorum? Is it a percent of the total community? Suppose we are like 10 people, is it like 60% that makes a quorum?
It's a majority. So
what 50, is a majority?
50% plus one. So
Sorry?
50%
50 plus percent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's a 5-person commission, three members is a quorum.
I see. So, and my last question is, what is the difference of a community meeting and a city meeting? Is it just that the city admin conducts it, that becomes a city meeting? How do you differentiate a city and a community meeting? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So if there's a meeting that's sponsored by the city, then that's generally going to be subject to the Brown Act if a majority of commissioners are participating in it. Examples of those could be, informational meetings that the city holds, for example, regarding the housing element. There were a series of those last year. Or the State of the City speech that the mayor gave earlier this year was a city event. That doesn't require Brown Act notice for events, that community organizations might host. And so the commissioners are free to attend those as long as they don't privately deliberate amongst themselves at the meeting.
Hi, everybody. My name is Angan, and I belong to the Housing Commission. I probably don't know most of you, but good to see everybody back in person. So my question about the Brown Act is, I think we try to follow the Brown Act the best we can, and there are so many rules behind it. But just to relate things a little easier and better, do you have any concrete examples of the recent past or not so recent past where the Brown Act was violated? And number two, for those cases, how was it mitigated?
So I don't think that we've had any violations recently in Cupertino where there have been consequential Brown Act violations. The violations that that we may come across are more of the kind where somebody accidentally replies to an email, and there's really not; those are not as consequential because usually they're not affecting a decision that the city has made. I guess one high-profile example of a Brown Act violation that comes to mind immediately is the San Francisco Unified School District. I believe it was the admissions process at Lowell High School. They wanted to change that, and the agenda description was vague in a way that made me wonder whether it was intentionally misleading and not to allow members of the public to know what was going to happen. And so the school district was sued over that that agenda description over the Brown Act, lost, and then the effect of that was to reverse the decision.
Oh, so they already took the decision behind the public, or they discussed it behind the public before officially?
It was discussed in public, but it wasn't agendized in a way that gave people sufficient notice. That's what the current court determined. And I'm sure there are other examples. If you put me on the spot a bit, but I could definitely. I mean, there are definitely other examples out there, but that's just one that came to mind.
Okay, so that means city of Cupertino so far so good.
So we have not. I don't think. Certainly, we have not had any consequential Brown Act issues since I've been here, and I was not aware of any in the recent past.
So mine is a very fun question. It's Sue Bose with the Housing Commission. You mentioned on the social media, if you're putting a like on a fellow commissioner's post, then that might be a violation of the Brown Act. Question is, let's say the fellow commissioner puts the picture of their granddaughter, new baby that came up, and you put a like on it. Is that still a violation?
No, it has to be about city business, and specifically business within the subject matter of the commission. So,
okay.
So personal interactions with other commissioners are completely fine, and and you can there's an exception for social events. So if the commission wants to get together for dinner, that's fine too. You just can't talk about the commission's business at the dinner.
I thought as much. Thank you.
Of course. So it's business within the subject matter jurisdiction of the commission. So it would be things that might come before the commission, and the commission might be called to make a decision on. So it's different for each of you, most of you here, because you're all on different commissions. But certainly the planning commissioners couldn't discuss zoning or development policy in the city, and the housing commissioners couldn't collectively discuss locations for affordable housing development, or the award of our grant funds for affordable housing, or make suggestions for that if a quorum were present. But it certainly doesn't limit purely personal or social communications with your fellow commissioners.
Herbert Marcy, Bike Commission. Is business travel a valid reason to be able to attend a commission meeting remotely? Unfortunately, it's not. Travel on city business is.
There is legislation pending this year. I don't know if it's going to move forward, but it's looking at remote meeting provisions again. So yeah, I think that's going to be the hardest thing for a lot of people, is that a lot of people have, you know, pretty active business travel schedules, and that is not no longer that you will no longer have the opportunity to attend a commission meeting remotely for that reason, unless you can find like a hotel conference room or something where you can post the location on the agenda and let people into the room. You know, so yeah, so you know, so that's always an option. That is the sort of the old, I think, not very useful Brown Act exception, but it's still on the books.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Carol Ma from the Arts and Culture Commission. So Chris, if we were to kind of simplify and create kind of a dummies rule, would it follow that if you are talking about any topics pertaining to your commission scope, full stop, don't do it outside of a meeting? Or is it with just another person, full stop, don't do it?
Yeah, you should limit your discussion to one person, one other commissioner about any topic. So you're allowed to talk if there's 5 people on the commission, which I think, you know, is the case for all of our commissions, except for the teen commission. You're allowed to have a conversation with another commissioner if you want to, you know, discuss or learn about or strategize about a matter on your agenda. But both of those commissioners have to be sure not to have a conversation with anybody else on the commission outside of a noticed meeting.
Got it. Okay. So if it's a topic that is not within the scope of our commission, we can gab away.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just commission specific topics only have one friend.
Right.
Anything else, have a party with everybody.
Of course.
got
Yeah.
it. Great.
Yep. Exactly. I maybe take 1 or 2 more questions, then I'll move on just to the next presentation, and hopefully we'll have time at the end.
Hey, my name is Muni Madipatla. I'm on the Planning Commission. Chris, a curiosity question. So I know at least 4 of the Planning Commission members are pretty active on Nextdoor, right? So let's say somebody posts something about, you know, city business, right? So some non-commission member, right, regular community member posted something, and some planning commissioner goes and says, you know, likes it, and, you know, and some other planning commissioner not knowing, you know, likes it. So if 3 of them end up liking it, is that a Brown Act violation?
So it's specifically not liking the posts of other members?
So some generic post by some common resident pertaining to the city business.
I would try to avoid that. Certainly, if you know that another commissioner has liked it, then I would definitely avoid that. I understand sometimes that's not
it's
obvious.
hard to know, right? Like there are 100, 200 people that liked it, and you end up accidentally pressing like, and then 3 of them end up liking it. So is that a problem?
It could be a problem. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I think. That's correct, but it's still not a noticed public meeting. It's open to, you know, people who are eligible to be on that Nextdoor group, but it's still not a noticed public meeting. But yeah, no, that's a real potential concern. So I think it's something to think about. Even if it is not a city matter? I think that the hypothetical was that it was a city matter. If it's not a city matter, then you know, knock yourself out. Okay. All right. Thanks. Those are terrific questions. I'm going to go on to the conflict of interest presentation, and there'll be times for questions at the end, and we can come back if there's any other Brown Act thoughts that people have too. Okay. So second part of the discussion. So there are certain obligations under state law that you all now have as by virtue of being public officials, and this is just an overview of what we're going to cover. So it's conflicts of interest in making contracts, which could apply to some of you serving in an advisory capacity to council. the Political Reform Act, which is the major public disclosure and conflict of interest law in the state of California, some changes to rules around campaign contributions that you should be aware of, rules around gifts, and then we'll just briefly cover common law conflicts of interest. So Government Code Section 1090 covers conflicts of interest in the makings of contracts, and it's a strict rule that a public officer or employee may not make contracts in which they are financially interested. And making is defined broadly to include approval, involvable discussion, planning, negotiation, solicitation. It could also include making recommendations on the contract to another legislative body like the City Council. So if there is a member who's financially interested in a contract and no exception applies, Section 1090 is a strict prohibition on the government agency entering into the contract. So there's not even an option of recusal to allow us to make the contract. There are a number of exceptions in the law. There are exceptions that are referred to as non-interest for purposes of creating a conflict, like small shareholdings in a public company. There are statutory interests that are defined as remote, like being an officer or employee of a nonprofit. And then there's also a rule, what's called a rule of necessity, which it basically states that if there's no other way the city can accomplish this business because, for example, there's a quorum of some necessary approval body that all shares this conflict of interest, there is a rule of necessity that allows members to participate in that circumstance. So the Political Reform Act is probably the area where you'll need to pay the most attention to potential conflicts of interest in your work for the city. You've all either filled out or will fill out your Form 700s, and that's a Political Reform Act requirement to provide that information to the FPPC. And the basic requirement is that public officials may not make or influence a government decision in which they know or should know they have a financial interest. There's some caveats to that. The financial interest has to be material, which to a large extent is defined based on the type of interest in FPPC regulations. And for example, there are specific rules on ownership of real property and the impact of city decisions on the value of real property based on the distance of the property to a project. And so those are all laid out in some degree of detail in the regulations. And there are different regulations, for example, for ownership of shares. There is an exception for a conflict where the effect on the official isn't distinguishable from the effect on the public generally. If it's something that's so widespread that a significant percentage of the population is going to be affected by it, then it's not a conflict of interest for purposes of the Political Reform Act. If a conflict exists, the commissioner is required to recuse themselves. And there are specific procedures that you'll need to follow if you confront this, and certainly you could work with your liaison, and the city attorney's office is also available to support when these issues come up. But the requirements are to publicly identify the nature of the financial interest, and then you must refrain from participating in the meeting. And generally, in-person meetings, that involves leaving the room. You could listen to the meeting if like for example, in this room, if their speakers are on in the back, or if it's being broadcast online, but you generally would have to leave the room. We will be participating in meetings less in fewer remote meetings, but generally, it involves leaving the Zoom seminar and either not viewing it or viewing it through the public link. There is an exception that allows a disqualified commissioner to speak during public comment if there's a personal economic interest at stake. And we'll certainly, if that's something that comes up, I would strongly encourage you to speak to the city attorney's office about it before, about the best way to handle that. So I'm briefly going to discuss on some changes to rules around campaign contributions that have extended the scope of who this applies to, as well as some of the time periods involved. And this applies to adjudicatory decisions that or recommendations that that commissioners might make. So the Planning Commission in particular is affected by this. I'm not sure that there's a lot of that kind of decision making done by other city commissions. But for example, for a land use permit, this would definitely apply. And it prohibits the public official from receiving or soliciting campaign contributions of greater than $250 when any of that kind of adjudicatory proceeding is pending, 12 months before or after the decision is made. And if those contributions are not returned within 30 days, recusal is required. Moving on, there are also limits on gifts. So as public officials, you're prohibited from receiving gifts of $10 or more from a lobbyist who's registered under state law, or gifts valued at $520 or more from any source in a 12-month period. Gifts from a single source must be $50 or more must be reported on your Form 500. That said, I'm sure that you're wondering about gifts from family members or other sort of things. There are numerous exceptions for those kind of gifts of a personal nature, and that does include gifts from family members, gifts from someone you're dating. There are quite a few exceptions to address those kind of personal relationships. So again, if you have any questions about the requirements or the exceptions, best to contact your staff liaison and work with the city attorney's office, because they can get pretty complicated. Last thing I wanted to touch on is common law conflicts of interest, so really the first bullet point here is pretty commonsensical, is that the common law prohibits public officials from using their positions for personal gain. So you have an obligation to act impartially and in the interest of the public, and not to advance yourself personally. There's also a requirement to avoid prejudice and protect due process, again, whenever there's a quasi-adjudicatory decision made. So some property right or other right of a person that is being affected by a decision of the city. And in those cases, there's a due process obligation to make the decisions based on evidence in the record, and public officials should avoid being committed to an outcome on an issue that's going to come before the hearing. And that to me is the real concern. That can be a problem if you're very active on Nextdoor. Is you definitely want to avoid taking any position on something that might come before the Planning Commission, because it could create an issue where you would wind up having to recuse yourself. So that's probably it doesn't mean, of course, you can't be active, but it means you have to be mindful of those limits. So I just want to just leave this with you, that some of this can be complex. There are rules, there are exceptions to the rules. There are potential consequences if there are violations. And so, the city attorney's office is a resource to help all of you sort through this issue. And so, please reach out if you have any questions. As soon as you think there might be an issue, we can help you work through those and solve the problem. So. With that, I think we still have some more time for questions, and
probably a quick question. So I don't know if I might be living within 1,000 feet of city office. So let's say in future, the new city hall construction project comes up and whatnot. So could I advocate for it or no, or oppose it or no? Could I vote on it? So just
So for real property between 500 and 1,000
1,000
feet,
feet,
of,
yeah.
of the project, there are specific rules, but there is not necessarily a presumption of a conflict of interest at greater than 500 feet. So you'd have to go through that analysis in the regulations.
so it's 500 feet, not 1,000 feet.
There are different rules for less than 500 feet, and then different rules between 500 and 1,000 feet, and then over 1,000 feet, it's generally there's a presumption that there's no
General.
conflict. Now it's not irrefutable, but there's a presumption that there's no conflict over 1,000 feet.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess this is good timing because I was going to ask a similar question, only I was going to be more direct about the 500 feet. What is it called? Bright line? And what that rule is. Because we've had some of that happen in the city in the past few years where there have been claims that people should be accused because of where they live. Is that written somewhere where it could be understood? Or could you explain? It sounds like the 0 to 500 feet is the strongest issue potentially. If you could explain exactly what that is, can you do that?
I can try. But thank you for. I should make it clear that the members of the public are able to ask questions and make comments at this time. So, but we do have to offer that opportunity for public comment. So, if there are any other members of the public here, this would be the time to participate. At a distance of less than 500 feet, where there's ownership interest in real property, or even a lease hold interest in real property, there is a presumption that there is a conflict of interest. That presumption can be rebutted in certain circumstances, but the default is that there's a conflict. Between 500 and 1,000, there's a multi-factored analysis that you have to go through to determine whether a conflict exists. Over 1,000 feet, the presumption flips the other way. There is a presumption that there's no conflict of interest. That presumption also could be rebutted based on evidence showing that there actually is a material financial impact. But again, it's a case-by-case analysis, but the default is that there is a conflict. If the distance is less than 500 feet, there's not a conflict. If it's greater than 1,000 feet, and between 500 and 1,000, it depends.
Are you going to get these slides?
Yeah, we can make these slides available.
So as per your discussion, in any campaign, the maximum donation or gift can be $250, you mentioned, right? $250?
The maximum, which the maximum donation of $250, is that?
So can we go 2-3 slides back? There was one confusion that I had.
Sure. Is it?
So that says less than 250. I mean, is it an error? Is it a typo or something? Because it should say more than 250. It should not be more than 250.
You're right, yeah.
Okay,
Thank
perfect.
you.
I have 2 questions. Luckily, with arts and fine culture, it's not so risque. But in case we're approving a piece that is a block away from where I live, is that an example where I have to recuse myself?
Yeah, so it could be, yeah. It could be, if it's if it's within 500 feet. Again, we'd go through the same analysis that I just talked about. If it's something that's where it's really going to be conclusively demonstrated that whatever decision you make is not going to have any material effect on your property value, then that you might fall in that category where actually like the presumption doesn't apply and you can still participate. Because I mean, I think it's reasonable to think that there's a difference between approving a piece of art and approving a 50-foot tall building, right? Right. I mean, so I think that there is that kind of flexibility that's built into the regulations, and we would just have to look at it case by case if that were to come up.
Okay. All right, I'll make sure to Google map distance things going forward with any applications. The other part is specifically the perception of conflict of interest. Another example I can think of is, it's one thing that we have our jobs, right? It's one thing if we promote it or we highlight it specifically on our commission's bio page. So for example, if I'm on the library commission and I say, I'm an editor at large for Scholastic, whatever, right? Is that an acceptable thing? Are we more concerned about the actual conflict of interest or the perceived kind of using the commission bio page as a placard for our personal business?
So I don't know if that's a conflict of interest. I think there's, this is more of a sort of a policy issue than a legal one. So I don't want to step out of turn too much. I'd say that there's probably a balance between giving some context to sort of who our commissioners are and what they do, and then but we would not want city resources being used to promote somebody's outside professional interests, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, so you're thinking it's much more of a policy issue. It's not a concern that at some point a citizen can say, you are promoting this as your bio, for example. I'm not trying to make any library, it's not like, I'm just calling that example as the librarian commission, but like the library commission, but like, it's a matter of policy of how we are perceived and what we can write publicly about how we make our money. It's not a conflict of interest.
No, yeah, I don't think having your paid employment in your city bio is a conflict of interest. No.
If it ties into what we do.
Correct.
Ties into our commission, I mean.
I would say just in general, I think, there's not a legal issue with sort of describing sort of what people do professionally. If we were going to put that information in official city bios, it's just providing information about the person in a way, right?
Okay, all right, I'll just follow up with you directly.
Yeah, no, of course, I am happy to have, if it's a specific discussion, I'm happy to have it.
Thank you for the presentation. It's actually good that we are getting the opportunity to talk to you, get our clarifications. So the issue first issue I would like to understand is that when you said there's a distance of 500 feet, 1,000 feet for taking a decision. So does it mean that it's a radial or is it Manhattan distance? How is it that computed, between 500 and 1,000? And the other thing is that does it mean that every person who is in the adjudicatory capacity, whether it's a council member or is a planning commissioner, they cannot participate in a city-related building, because city-related building is kind of more, though it's a real property, it's not exactly directly something which may impact them. So
the first question. I think the details of sort of how the distance is calculated, I mean, that's handled by the clerk's office and the staff liaison. I don't want to sort of, I think I know what the exact rules are, but I don't want to guess on them standing up here. The second question, I think the question was, let me see if I can try to understand it, that like if there's a city building that's going to affect everybody in the city, so is that a conflict of interest that would disqualify everybody in the city from participating? Is that sort of the
especially the people who have the approval authority on land use and building and stuff like that? So
yeah, so I went through it very quickly, but there is the public generally exception in the Political Reform Act. So if there is it has to be a financial interest, right? And so it's not clear it's a financial interest. But even if it is a financial interest, if it's something that's going to affect everybody in the city, then that's a situation where the public generally exception would apply, and it would not be a conflict of interest to participate in that decision.
The second question is something which is more generic. It's not, I wouldn't say it's just related to the city itself. I wouldn't say it's even related directly to a commission, but is there a statutory limitation, a statutory limit of few years or something like that, where a person who has held an office, I will give you an example which might help. So we had a senator who actually published a book, and he made more than $1 million. He might have got permission because, there's nothing against writing a book, but it definitely made him fairly rich. The person is, we know that he is a sitting senator. So similarly, if there is a person who is serving in the city, and they write something which might give them some pecuniary benefits, what kind of limits are there? What kind of statutory limits are there?
I think it would. I think it's a pretty broad question. I would say, generally, people have a First Amendment right to write and speak on different issues, right? And so elected officials don't surrender those First Amendment rights just by virtue of being an elected official. So. I think that would be my general answer. If there was a specific situation that would limit it, I'm not aware of that.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, I'm Ilango Ganga from Bicycle Pedestrian Commission. I have a question related to common law conflict of interest. Let's say if a commissioner or a council member takes a position, or doesn't necessarily communicate that he takes a position, but he or she takes a position, but advocates for a project or advocates for an issue, and that the same issue comes in front of the body for decision making. Should that person participate in that discussion, or should that person recuse from it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the answer is that it depends on whether it's something that's a legislative matter or something that's an adjudicatory matter. And by something that's adjudicatory when it affects somebody's, rights, property rights. So the right to build a project on your property, the right to have a license to practice a profession. Something that's just legislation or city policy that doesn't affect those rights, that's not an adjudicative matter. And so in that case, it's in that case where it's legislative, it's fine for officials to express their views, pro or con on a project. And of course, that happens all the time. It's part of being a public official. The risk is where there is that adjudicatory hearing, a permit, a license or something. In that case, the official should not express a view as to whether to approve or deny the approval, because that could create a potential due process violation that would invalidate the decision.
Okay, so for any matter that comes on the agenda, then the person is not supposed to take a position or advocate for a position and then also vote on the same position.
If it's an adjudicatory matter. And I'd say that for most of the commissions, that's not going to be a concern. It's definitely something that the Planning Commission has to keep in mind. For most of the commissions, you'll be providing advice to council on legislative matters, and so there wouldn't be limits on taking a position in advance of a vote.
Okay, so my second question is related to financial conflict of interest. Let's say if someone is owning shares in publicly traded company, like for example, say Target, but Target also does business in Cupertino. Does that constitute a conflict of interest?
It can be, yeah. It depends on the amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's that amount?
$25,000 or 1%, whichever is less.
1% of the company.
Yeah, or $25,000.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
I think maybe 5%.
Huh? What's that?
I think the recommendation you gave was 5%.
Okay. This is why I try not to give it. This is why you have the books, right? Because I don't ever want to give that kind of advice without looking at it first.
But $25,000 is what I heard.
$25,000 is correct. Yeah.
That's why last meeting, two of the commission had to recuse themselves.
If I had 5% of the value of that.
No. Yeah, no, I don't think anybody hit even the 1% limit. I'd be pretty sure. It's the lesser amount, yeah. Okay, well, if there's not any other questions from commissioners or members, or questions or comments from members of the public, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to attend tonight. I thank Kirsten for organizing this and presenting. I'll turn it over to her to wrap things up.
I just want to remind everyone to sign in if you haven't already done so. As staff as well, please use the sign-in sheet in the front lobby. And we'll adjourn now. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.